is something it's hard for some people to factor in, but this was part of real life at the time. The Prophet himself was married to Abi Sufyan's daughter, Habiba. So this is not that easy and that simple thing of we are blankly going to condemn people, because lines here are drawn on the basis of the people's character, not on the basis of family relations. All of this was to take the antagonistic and the belligerent sting out of a generation that fought against the Prophet in Mecca. But was Abu Sufyan and Muawiyah, were they really won over to the psychology and the character of committed Muslims? The facts later on indicate otherwise. Even though, as far as we know, they never challenged the rituals of Islam. None of them ever took issue with the salah or the siyam or the zakah or whatever constitutes the personal responsibilities of individual Muslims. Never have we come across anything like that. What we do have, though, is a set or a class of people now who have the old attitude of opposing Islam now under a veneer of Islam. This is the new development that occurs at this time. So the Prophet of Allah passes on, trying to blunt the shaitani inclinations of people who used to have power and now they lost power. It was, in a sense, demeaning to call these opponents and enemies of Allah and His Prophet, when they finally surrendered to the wave of Islam in its innocence, when they were called tulaqa and mu'allafa qulubuhum, they felt inferior. This, and then it is, if you read these books of history and seerah, etc., you find that the committed Muslims at that time were not socializing with these tulaqa. They would not communicate or associate with Abi Sufyan and with Muawiyah and the rest of this class of people. When the Prophet of Allah came into Mecca and Islam became the order of Mecca, it is reported in the common books of history. We're not plucking out information from a particular side. We are trying as much as possible to stick to the common history that we have. In the shades of the Kaaba, when the Prophet of Allah, alayhi wa alihi as-salatu was-salam, when he came to express this sense of equality and justice and commonhood to the Muslims, to now the new adherents of this Islam, when he was saying to them, Ya ma'shara Quraysh, Inna Allah adhaba ankum nakhwat al-jahiliyyah wa ta'azzumaha bil-aba' alasna min Adam wa Adamu min turab. And then the Prophet of Allah mentions the ayah in Surah Al-Hujurat, إِنَّا خَلَقْنَاكُم مِّن ذَكَرٍ وَأُنثَى وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا إِنَّ أَكْرَمَكُمْ عِندَ اللَّهِ أَتْقَاكُمْ. The Prophet of Allah here was stating the new value system that these people, many of them reluctantly, many of them in an opportunistic manner, many of them just to avoid the problems and the trouble if they chose otherwise. He said to them, Ya ma'ashara Quraysh, you the folks of Quraysh, إن الله أذهب عنكم نخوة الجاهلية. Allah has now relieved you of the upperclassmanship of this pre-Islamic era, of the Jahiliyyah culture that you belong to. Allah has relieved you now of that, and of magnifying your ancestry, giving your tribal affiliation a status in society. Allah has relieved you of that too. إن الله أذهب عنكم نخوة الجاهلية وتعظمها بالآباء. ألسنا من آدم وآدم من تراب. Are we not from Adam? And Adam comes from clay. And then he quotes the ayah that we are all familiar with. خلقناكم من ذكر وأنثى وجعلناكم شعوبا وقبائل لتعارفوا إن أكرمكم عند الله أتقاكم. When the Prophet of Allah was in the vicinity of the holy sanctuaries in Mecca, stating this to the Qurayshi public, Abu Sufyan and a couple of other mushriks or prior mushriks were sitting around the Kaaba, and they were making statements of how did we reach this condition that we are in now, feeling either negative or sorry about the condition now that they are in. When these two people with Abu Sufyan were saying these types of things, Abu Sufyan said, I'm afraid, I'm paraphrasing here, he says, I'm afraid if I were to speak, these stones around would inform on me. If this was a Muslim now at this time, even though the Prophet was dealing in a delicate manner with the the potential transitional psychology that this person may be in, this statement divulges to us the real self of this person. So he goes up later on to Allah's Prophet and, according to some sources of information, pleads with him, have my son become a scribe, a person who will register the scripture that is being revealed to you. And he wanted something else. He wanted a position of power, to have someone from his family, he himself or one of his sons, become a military commander. And he didn't get that type of request, but his son Muawiyah was given the leeway to write. The person knew how to write, let him write what there is of these ayat and this wahy. And the Prophet, may Allah's peace and blessings be upon him, passes away. And in As-Saqifa, this is another time where a person's real personality surfaces. When there was a little commotion around